They say silence is power, that if you just vanish, cut off contact, go dark, disappear, someone will suddenly see your worth, feel the sting of losing you, and come crawling back. But let's be honest, how's that been working for you? How many times have you gone no contact, expecting a reaction that never came? Or worse, how many times have they used your silence as a stage to perform, to show you they've already moved on, while you're still sitting there wondering what went wrong? You've been told a half-truth. And here's the raw, uncomfortable reality. No contact is not the knockout punch you thought it was. It's not a master move. It's a default reaction, one that's predictable and often powerless. Let's expose the illusion. Most people today expect no contact. They've seen it before, been through it, maybe even planned for it. So what happens when you try to use silence as your sword, but they don't even flinch? What happens when they use your absence to inflate their ego instead of deflate it? This is the part no one tells you. If you're not doing it right, your silence will feed their pride, not starve it. That's why today, we're not just talking about ignoring them. We're talking about crushing their ego in a way that leaves no room for doubt, confusion, or control. This isn't about petty revenge. This isn't about getting back at them through passive-aggressive mind games. This is about taking a brutal, stoic inventory of what really works. This is about learning how to become emotionally unreachable, mentally untouchable, and spiritually indifferent, not because you're cold-hearted, but because you finally remember who the hell you are. It's about going deeper than no contact. Because if your goal is to be missed, to make them question themselves, to reclaim your power, and to rise above their reach, you need to flip the game entirely. So here's the question. Are you ready to stop surviving the heartbreak and start owning it? Are you ready to go beyond what they expected, to evolve into someone they never saw coming, someone they can't forget, can't reach, and can't replace? Then stay with me, because this isn't going to be soft. This isn't going to be easy, but it will be transformational. We're not here to wallow. We're not here to chase. This is about stoicism in action. Real, raw, grounded, stoic relationships that teach you how to win in silence and rise with discipline. If you've ever wondered how to make someone feel the full weight of losing you, not through words, but through your evolution, then don't blink, don't scroll, don't click away. Because what you're about to learn, it changes everything. And I promise you, part 6 of this video will hit differently. It's the final move, the one that flips the entire story in your favor, but you have to earn it. So let's begin. 1. Burn the illusion. You think you're missing them, don't you? You think you're mourning the relationship, the late-night talks, the laughter, the intimacy, the way they looked at you when the world was quiet. But let's pull the veil off. You're not grieving the person they left long ago. What you're really holding on to is a carefully curated fantasy, one you stitched together from fragments of who they were, who you hoped they'd be, and who they pretended to be when they needed your love, more than they valued it. The illusion you're clutching so tightly is not who they are, but who they appear to be through the lens of your devotion, your loyalty, your deep and sincere willingness to believe that love, real love, could not just exist, but endure. And it hurts because the person you thought they were is someone you'd still fight for even now. But that person, they never truly existed. They were a projection, a mask, a reflection of your own emotional generosity. Every time you replay those memories, those carefully selected highlights of affection and connection, you're feeding a mirage, inflating the ego of someone who already walked away, not from who you are, but from who they never had the capacity to truly appreciate. So let me ask you this. When you think of them, are you remembering reality, or are you remembering the fantasy you needed to survive the pain? Because if you're honest, brutally honest, you'll admit that they weren't consistent, that the love didn't match the words, that the patterns told a story of avoidance, disrespect, manipulation, no matter how soft the tone, no matter how passionate the moments. You see, when people leave, they don't just exit your life. They tear open every wound you tried to ignore. They rip down the vision board you built with them in mind. And the aftermath leaves you questioning not just what happened, but who you are without them. But that's the trick of illusion. It seduces you into believing you lost something irreplaceable, when in truth, what you lost was a lie you helped co-write. If you ever want to crush their ego, you have to stop feeding the fantasy that they were someone exceptional. You have to pull them off the pedestal you built, not because you hate them, but because they never earned it. And yes, that's hard. It feels like betraying your own heart to admit you love someone who never truly showed up for you. But that pain, that realization, that's not weakness, that's awakening. It's the beginning of Stoicism, seeing things not as you wish they were, but as they truly are. When you burn the illusion, you're not being cruel. You're being free, because as long as you keep worshipping their potential, you remain emotionally enslaved to a false story. You keep yourself small, orbiting a sun that no longer shines for you. And here's the brutal irony. The more you glorify them in your mind, the more you validate their decision to leave. The more you cling to hope, the more power you hand back to the person who fractured your peace. If you want to win, and I mean really win, not in petty games but in quiet internal transformation, you must kill the fantasy and let truth rise from the ashes. Remember the lies, remember the emotional gaps, remember how many times you swallowed your feelings to keep the peace, because love without safety, without respect, without emotional consistency isn't love, it's ego preservation. And if you want to crush theirs, you have to stop protecting it with your own denial. You have to stop making excuses for how they treated you. You have to call it what it was. Manipulation masked as romance, confusion dressed up as mystery, inconsistency framed as emotional complexity. None of it was love. And once you name that clearly, the power dynamic shifts. They no longer sit in your heart as someone who slipped away. They sit in your memory as someone who taught you what not to accept. That's the Stoic mindset. Stoic relationships are built on clarity, not fantasy, on honesty, not emotional delusion. You don't chase a ghost. You learn to live without it, to grow beyond it, to never let it haunt your self-worth again. And yes, this requires discipline, mental toughness. It means telling yourself over and over again that their absence is not a tragedy, but a gift. A gift that reveals how far you were willing to betray yourself just to feel seen. But now you see yourself, and that's where power begins. Stop romanticizing the moments they breadcrumbed you. Stop obsessing over the what-ifs and if-onlys. Those thoughts are emotional poison. Their ego feeds on your nostalgia. Starve it. Take their name out of your prayers. Pull their image out of your daydreams. Every second you spend reminiscing is a second you delay your rebirth. You are not healing when you're idolizing the person who hurt you. You are not rising when you're recycling the best parts of someone who made you feel small. Stoicism isn't about shutting down. It's about waking up. It's about learning to live with the truth, even when it hurts more than the lie. And the truth is this: they weren't your soulmate. They were your mirror. And what you saw in them was a reflection of the love you were ready to give, not the love they were capable of returning. That's not heartbreak. That's misalignment. And now you get to choose. Will you keep rewatching the same emotional movie that ends in silence and confusion? Or will you burn the script, build a new identity and rise? Because real detachment doesn't begin when you block them. It begins when you stop believing they were ever the one. Burn the illusion, and in those ashes, you'll find your clarity, your focus, your rebirth. And that's what will make them feel it. Not your absence, not your silence, but the unshakable peace of someone who doesn't need the fantasy anymore. This is what Stoic relationships are made of. Not control, not validation, but absolute. self-respect forged in reality. And when you reach that point, you don't just crush their ego, you evaporate it quietly, permanently, without ever saying a single word. That is stoicism in motion. That is your power. And that is only the beginning. 2. Master the void. Most people fear silence. They treat it like a punishment, like emotional purgatory, a state of waiting that presses against their chest until the noise returns. But you need to become different. You need to learn to master the void, because this isn't about enduring the silence until they come back, text back, or crack under the weight of your absence. This is about turning silence into your strongest weapon, your most sacred space. Ask yourself, why does the void feel uncomfortable? Why does it echo with anxiety and not peace? The answer is simple. Because your nervous system is still addicted to their presence. You're still wired to expect their attention, their reaction, even their rejection. And every hour that passes in silence feels like a personal failure. That mindset must die now. Because the void is not where you wait for them, it's where you meet yourself. It's where transformation starts, where clarity sharpens, where purpose is forged. If you want to crush their ego, surviving the silence is not enough. You must thrive inside it. Most people use the void as a waiting room. They sit with one eye on the clock and the other on the door, hoping that at any moment their absence will make a noise loud enough to bring the other person back. But that is weakness. That is disguised dependence. That is still you needing something outside of yourself to feel seen. A Stoic doesn't do that. A Stoic turns the silence into structure, into rhythm, into discipline. They wake up, train harder, read deeper, create relentlessly, not because they want to be seen, but because they finally understand that evolution is internal, and power doesn't come from being noticed, it comes from being unshakable. So, what are you doing with your silence? Are you stalking their socials? Are you counting their story views? Are you pretending to be detached while secretly hoping they're hurting too? If so, the void is using you. But when you flip it, when you learn to sit in it with your back straight, your breath slow, and your thoughts clear, something changes. The void becomes a temple, a battlefield, a mirror, a place where the old version of you dies and the new one is born. Because in the absence of validation, you learn to validate yourself. In the absence of noise, you hear your own truth. And in the absence of their attention, you see how much of your worth was tied to their recognition. That's the moment you reclaim it. The void teaches you the hardest truth, that you were never really attached to them. You were attached to how they made you feel about yourself. Once you master that, they lose all power. That's why Stoic relationships are so rare, because they are built by people who are whole on their own. People who have sat in the darkness long enough to find their own light. And that light, it's blinding to those who still depend on attention to feel alive. So let the void be your training ground. Wake up earlier. Cut the distractions. Set brutal standards for your time, your mind, your energy. Become someone who is so internally full that silence doesn't scare you. It sharpens you. Because while they're out there trying to distract themselves, trying to numb the emptiness, trying to collect likes or play games with someone new, you are growing, quietly, relentlessly. Stoicism isn't about being cold, it's about being in control. So ask yourself, what is your silence building? Are you getting sharper or softer? Are you becoming disciplined or distracted? You don't need their apology. You don't need them to notice your glow up. You need to become so focused that their memory fades, not because you force it, but because it no longer fits the new structure of your mind. Mastering the void means you stop begging the world to see you. It means you start acting like someone who already knows their value. It's in the void where you stop checking your phone, stop overthinking every old text, stop reading between the lines of their silence. It's in the void where you stop waiting and start becoming. And don't get it twisted, this is not about proving them wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you were never broken to begin with. You were just distracted by a connection that served your insecurity more than your evolution. They didn't break you, they exposed the cracks, and now you get to seal them, not with ego, but with unshakable peace. That's what makes someone unforgettable. Not the posts, not the new outfit, not the attention from others, but the stillness, the calm, the control. When you master the void, you radiate a different energy, one that doesn't seek, one that doesn't chase, one that doesn't perform. And they feel it. Even if they don't say a word, they sense it. They notice that your energy has shifted, that you're no longer reacting, that you've become someone who doesn't care if they see, because what you're building is no longer about them. That's how you flip the power dynamic, not through games, but through grounded transformation. So sit in the silence, feel the loneliness, let it burn if it has to, but don't run, don't break, don't reach back out, because the longer you hold the line, the stronger you become. This is how Stoicism trains you, not in moments of glory, but in moments of isolation. This is where warriors are made, not in the spotlight, but in the shadows. And when you emerge, when you've built something real inside of yourself, when you walk into a room and don't scan for them, when you stop needing their attention to feel alive, that's when the void becomes your victory. And when they finally scroll and see your name again, when they hear about you through a mutual, when they feel your absence like a hole they can't fill, know this: you didn't get there by luck. You got there by sitting in the storm and refusing to fold. That's the strength they never saw coming. That's the version of you they can't reach anymore. So if you feel yourself slipping, if you feel the urge to break the silence, to just check in, remind yourself, you are not in waiting mode. You are in warrior mode. And this silence, it's not passive, it's preparation. Preparation for the next level of you, one they'll never get to meet. So if this message is hitting you deep, if it's resonating with the part of you that knows it's time to rise and not look back, then prove it, like this video. Comment number 1 if you're starting to feel that power build in your chest. And if you're serious about mastering the void and stepping fully into stoic relationships that empower you, not trap you, hit that subscribe button now. You've only just begun. 3. Withdraw all validation. Validation is the ego's favorite drug. It's not love that feeds their pride. It's your attention, your reactions, your subtle signals that say, you still matter. And that's where most people fail. They think going no contact is enough, but then they post just to be seen. They watch stories hoping to be watched back. They drop cryptic quotes designed to sting, and they pretend it's all accidental. But deep down, they want one thing, a response. Even if it's just silence, even if it's just the hope that the other person is watching. But let's be clear. Every subtle move you make that hints at your pain, your need to be acknowledged, your desire to be missed, is validation. And validation is currency. You think you're being detached, but you're still paying them with energy. You're still handing them proof that they had an impact. You're still saying, in whispers, look at what you did to me. And 4, someone who feeds on control, who left without resolution, who maybe even hurt you intentionally, that whisper is deafening. It confirms that their absence still owns space in your mind. If you want to truly crush their ego, you have to kill the supply. You have to go deeper than no contact. You have to become emotionally invisible. That means no thirst traps designed to get their attention. No passive-aggressive tweets that only they'll understand. No playlists. No captions, no shared memories, nothing. Withdraw your energy completely, not just your words, but your presence, your vibration, your emotional residue. And I know that's hard. I know every part of you wants to be seen, to be understood, to be validated in your pain. But that's not stoicism. Stoicism is about learning to sit in the fire without screaming. It's about learning that self-respect doesn't announce itself. It just moves differently. So when the urge comes, when you want to check who watched your story, when you want to post something subtle, when you want to reach out with just a friendly check-in, ask yourself, what am I trying to prove? And to whom? Because if the answer is them, you've already lost your power. The minute your actions are tailored to their attention, you're no longer free. You're still orbiting their ego, still reacting to their gravity. And the most painful part? They can feel it. They can sense your emotional attachment through silence. That's why withdrawing validation is not just about blocking or disappearing. It's about becoming unreachable on a vibrational level. It's about moving so clean, so emotionally detached, that they start questioning whether they ever truly had an impact at all. And that questioning, that gap of uncertainty, is what crushes their ego, because people don't fear being hated, they fear being irrelevant. Indifference is terrifying. When someone who used to care deeply suddenly stops feeding your identity, stops chasing, stops reacting, that's when the mirror cracks. That's when they're left alone with their choices. And most of the time, they didn't expect you to make it this far. They expected you to fold, to text, to break. They expected you to watch every move they made, to compare yourself to whoever they replaced you with, to stay stuck in a loop of silent suffering. And every time you didn't react, they pushed harder, posted more, moved louder. But the real flex, the real ego crusher, it's when none of that matters to you anymore, when you no longer care who they're with, what they're doing, or if they ever come back. When you stop needing to be chosen, that's when you've won. Because at that point, your validation has returned home to you. And that shift in energy is so rare, so powerful, that it echoes even in your silence. This is what Stoic relationships demand, not just detachment, but detachment without the performance. You're not ignoring them to punish them. You're ignoring them because you've transcended the need for their attention altogether. And when you do that, when your mind stops running loops about them, when your day is no longer framed by their actions, when your energy no longer spikes at the sound of their name, that's when you're truly free. The irony is that they will feel it before you realize you've even done it. They'll sense the shift, the missing validation, the absence of emotional breadcrumbs, and suddenly they'll go searching for signs, for traces, for proof that you still care. And they'll find nothing, not a post, not a reaction, not a hint, just peace. And peace is deadly to someone who thrives on chaos. Peace is what exposes them, because now their ego is starving. It's hungry for the feedback loop you used to provide, and when they realize the supply is gone, they'll either lash out or try to reconnect, but you won't care. Because when you pull back your validation completely, you begin to validate yourself in ways they never could. You begin to rebuild your worth, not through their recognition, but through your own reflection. That's when the glow-up becomes real, not because you're trying to be seen, but because you're simply living in alignment. And let me be clear, this isn't about faking indifference. That doesn't work. Pretending you don't care while secretly hoping they notice. That's still validation. The goal is not to look detached. The goal is to become detached, to genuinely reach a place where their absence no longer defines your present. And when you get there, you'll realize something even deeper. You never needed their attention. You just needed your own. That's the core of Stoicism. That's the essence of true emotional mastery. And that's what crushes egos without ever lifting a finger. When they see that you're not trying to be strong, you just are. When they realize that your life has evolved with or without their closure, that you're not trying to win them back, that you're not even playing the game anymore, that's when the silence starts to scream. That's when regret starts to bloom. Because suddenly, they're not the main character in your story anymore. They're not even a chapter worth rereading. And their ego, it can't handle that. But yours, it no longer needs their approval. That's the final shift. When validation becomes internal, not external. When you learn to enjoy your own peace more than their chaos. When you stop needing to be seen because you're finally living for yourself. This is where the game ends. And if you reach this level, where there's no reaction left to give, no emotional fuel left to burn, no validation left to withdraw, then you've done something most people never do. You've crushed their ego, not with revenge, not with bitterness, but with calm, with silence, with total emotional discipline. And when you reach that place, you don't even need them to notice, because you've already won. You've reclaimed every part of yourself you gave away, and now you don't give it out for free. Not to anyone, especially not to someone who only showed up when it was convenient. Remember this, their ego doesn't care about your pain, it cares about your reaction. And when there's no reaction, there's nothing left to feed on. That's when they start to feel the void, not the one you sat in, but the one you left behind in them. That's the echo of true indifference. That's the legacy of Stoic relationships, where you don't destroy others, you simply rise beyond them, quietly, powerfully, and permanently. 4. Build a new identity in the shadows. They expected you to move on loudly, to flaunt your healing like a badge, to post every gym selfie, every night out, every filtered smile designed to prove you're okay. They expected performance, not transformation. But that's where you flip the script. That's where you stop living in their projections and start rebuilding in silence. Because here's what most people don't understand about real change. It doesn't happen in the spotlight. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't care who's watching. The most dangerous, untouchable version of you isn't the one who glows up for attention. It's the one who vanishes from the stage and returns as someone unrecognizable. You see, after the illusion burns, after the silence settles and the emotional ties dissolve, you're left with a blank slate. And in that space, you have one of two choices: chase validation or construct identity. If you want to crush their ego, the second option isn't just more powerful, it's inevitable. So what does it mean to build a new identity in the shadows? It means removing the parts of yourself that were sculpted around their preferences, their approval, their patterns. It means dismantling the version of you who waited for closure, who broke at the sight of their name, who lost sleep wondering if you were enough. That version dies here, in the dark, quietly. No one claps when you rise at 5 a.m. instead of checking their status. No one applauds when you choose discipline over distraction, focus over fantasy. But that's the point. You're not doing it for the show. You're doing it for the self. You're not trying to look stronger. You're becoming stronger. And every hour spent in the silence, every rep at the gym, every journal entry, every meal prepared with purpose, every boundary you set with ruthless clarity, that's a brick in the new foundation. That's a thread in the new identity. You are becoming someone who doesn't need to be seen to feel real. You are becoming someone who moves with such conviction, such internal direction, that no outside force can shake your core. And when you start showing up for yourself, not for attention, not to prove anything, but simply because you refuse to let their memory become the peak of your story, that's when something deep shifts. That's when Stoicism becomes not just a concept, but your lifestyle. And Stoic relationships, they are built on that identity, not the one that needs to post for revenge, not the one that spirals when left unread, but the one that sees rejection as redirection, silence as space to evolve, and absence as the catalyst to rebuild from the ground up. Most people heal to be noticed. You don't. You heal because staying broken is no longer acceptable. You train, not to post the glow-up photo, but because you're tired of carrying emotional weight in a weak body. You study not to flex intelligence, but because your mind is your new battlefield and clarity is your weapon. And here's the twist. They will notice, eventually. They'll scroll or hear your name or see you in passing, and something will feel off or maybe too right. You look like you, but you move differently. You speak with less urgency, with more direction. You carry peace like armor. You don't explain yourself because nothing about you is up for negotiation. You've changed, and not the surface level kind. You've become the person they thought you'd never be. The version of you they weren't strong enough to grow with. And the realization will hit them slowly, silently, and permanently. They didn't just lose someone, they lost the best version of someone they underestimated. And the cruelest part? You're not even trying to show them. You've moved so far into your purpose, your identity, your discipline, that they're not even in the frame anymore. That's how you crush their ego, not with posts, not with replacements, but with complete, unshakable self-mastery forged in the shadows. You don't evolve in public because performance is weakness. Performance is a desperate cry for recognition, and recognition is still control. The moment your healing becomes a show, you've given your power back. But when you heal privately, when you rise silently, when you disappear and reappear with nothing left to prove, that's when they feel it. Not because you're doing anything to make them feel it, but because your absence now feels like a closed door they can't open. You've become someone they don't have access to anymore, not because you're hiding, but because you've risen to a level they can't reach. Your identity has shifted frequencies, and theirs, it's still stuck in the loop of attention and ego. That's why Stoicism works. It doesn't play the emotional chess game, it flips the board. It says, I don't need this dynamic anymore. I choose peace over performance. And in that space, you finally realize your real power wasn't in being desired, it was in being self-directed. This is where true confidence is born, when no one is looking and you still choose to rise. When there are no likes, no comments, no stories viewed, but you still keep going. Because now you're not trying to be seen. You're building something bigger, a foundation, a fortress, a legacy. And when they finally realize you're no longer seeking anything from them, not closure, not curiosity, not even attention, it will break their ego in ways no message ever could. Because the most haunting truth for someone who thought they were unforgettable is realizing they've already been forgotten. Not out of spite, not because you hate them, but because they no longer fit the life you've designed for yourself. And that new identity, it's not a costume. It's who you really are now that the noise is gone. So ask yourself, who are you when no one is watching? Who are you when you don't post about your progress? When you don't seek validation for your healing? When you don't drop hints, hoping they'll pick up the thread? Are you still growing? Are you still evolving? If the answer is yes, then you've already won, because you are now living in full alignment. You are not reacting to the past. You are creating your future in silence, in discipline, in truth. That's Stoicism. That's unshakable. That's what makes you unforgettable. Not because you tried, but because you no longer needed to be remembered. So if this is the chapter you're ready to write, if you're ready to disappear into the work, into your calling, into the version of yourself they'll never get to meet, then take the next step. Like this video. Comment. Number 1, if you're done performing and ready to become. And subscribe now, because the next part of this journey goes even deeper, and you don't want to miss it. 5. Become unreachable. No contact is the first step, but becoming unreachable is the final evolution. It's the line between someone who disappears physically and someone who vanishes energetically. Most people confuse the two. They think not texting, not calling, not showing up is enough to reclaim power. But silence without detachment is just noise. You might be gone from their life, but if you're still reacting in your mind, if you're still checking their socials, if you're still hoping for a response or secretly crafting your next move based on how they'll interpret it, you're not unreachable. You're just invisible and still emotionally chained. Being unreachable means your soul no longer flinches at their name. Your thoughts no longer orbit the gravitational pull of what if. You've stopped watching for signs, stopped dissecting silences, stopped trying to read between the digital lines of their absence. Because at some point you realize the truth that Stoicism forces you to face. Anything that can disturb your peace owns a part of you. And ownership, after betrayal or abandonment, is slavery. You can't move forward while still looking over your shoulder. You can't become the most powerful version of yourself while wondering if they'll ever come back. So, becoming unreachable is not an act, it's an identity, it's a frequency, it's a commitment to a life where your emotional real estate is no longer up for rent, where your inner world is guarded like sacred ground. It begins in the mind. You stop running mental simulations of how they might return. You stop imagining that message, that apology, that future reunion where everything finally makes sense. Because the moment you let go of needing their return, you become dangerous. Not reckless, not bitter, but focused, grounded, centered in self-respect. You're not hoping anymore, you're building, and that shift is everything. Emotional unreachability is magnetic. It's what makes them feel the distance more than your silence ever could. Because silence can be a tool, but indifference is a weapon. When they can no longer trigger you, when their absence doesn't evoke longing but peace, they lose their grip. And you stop being the person they thought they could orbit forever. You stop being predictable, and people hate unpredictability when they're used to controlling the outcome. The ego thrives on predictability. It wants to know that if it posts, you'll watch. If it likes, you'll react. If it pulls back, you'll chase. But when none of those behaviors work, when you offer no reaction, no curiosity, no emotional signal, they panic. Because your silence is no longer a tactic, it's become your state. And in that stillness, you become the mirror they cannot manipulate. But here's the hard truth. Becoming unreachable means cutting off the emotional fuel you used to thrive on too. The drama, the hope, the toxic highs and devastating lows. That cycle, addictive as it was, is not love. It's emotional chaos disguised as passion. And letting go of that means letting go of a version of yourself that believed chaos meant connection. This is where Stoicism deepens. You no longer live for intensity. You live for peace. You live for clarity. And clarity is boring to those who are addicted to the storm, but for you, it becomes the new standard. You don't check their page. You don't scroll for signs. You don't ask mutual friends about them, not because you don't care, but because even caring now feels like a betrayal of your progress. You've rewritten the rules, and now your time, your energy, your focus, they're all reserved for the version of you that's still rising. That's why Stoic relationships feel different. They're not about control. They're not about attention. They're about alignment. They're about becoming so complete within yourself that another person becomes an addition, not a necessity. And if they leave, if they betray, if they ghost, you don't collapse. Because your foundation was never built on their presence. That's what becoming unreachable creates. Emotional immunity. You still feel, but you don't fold. You still love, but you don't lose yourself. You're no longer swinging between obsession and withdrawal. You're simply centered, whole, disconnected from dysfunction. And when they test the waters, because eventually they always do, you offer nothing. No opening, no invitation, no explanation. Just stillness, just distance, just the cold, factual reality that their access has expired. And that's where their ego begins to fracture. Not because you hurt them, but because you no longer need them. That realization is louder than any angry text, any revenge post, any attempt to prove you've moved on. You've moved forward, quietly, authentically, permanently. And when you're unreachable, they can no longer measure their worth through your reaction. They can no longer tether their significance to your attention. That's how you win, not by shouting, not by signaling, but by erasing the emotional bridge that once gave them power. It doesn't matter how attractive they are, how connected you once felt, how deeply the bond once ran. If they cost you your peace, they've forfeited their place in your future. And you've now become the kind of person they used to dream of keeping but were never equipped to value. That's what time in the void taught you. That's what silence rebuilt in you. And now that you're here, on the other side of craving, you look back and realize they never had you. They had a version of you who still sought completion outside of yourself. But this version, this one is sovereign, unshaken, stoic, and so when people ask what happened, why you don't care anymore, why you haven't said anything, the answer is simple. You became unreachable, not as a strategy, but as a symptom of your evolution. There's nothing left to say because nothing they could say would change your path. You've already chosen it. And it doesn't include going back. You don't circle old chapters hoping they'll read differently. You close the book. You write a new one. One where your identity is not shaped by loss but by discipline. One where you don't flinch at solitude. Where you don't perform healing, you embody it. Fully, fiercely, quietly. You don't need to prove you've moved on. Your lack of response is the proof. Your consistency in silence is the message. Your growth without announcement is the closure. And that's what Stoicism ultimately trains into you, not to run from your emotions, but to master them so thoroughly that your peace becomes louder than your pain ever was. That's how you become unreachable, not in hiding, but in rising. Not in blocking them, but in making them realize that even if they reached out, you wouldn't break character. Because your character is now built on standards they can't meet, and a frequency they can't follow. That's what real power looks like. That's what real detachment feels like. That's when you stop wondering if they'll ever come back, and start realizing it doesn't matter. You've already left the version of yourself who cared. And from this height, from this stillness, from this new identity, you can see it clearly now. You didn't lose them. You lost the illusion that they were meant to stay. And in return, you gained something irreplaceable, yourself, whole, calm, and finally, untouchable. 6. Let them watch from afar. There's a unique kind of power in not blocking someone, in not hiding, in not deleting your presence from the places you once shared. Not because you want to be seen, but because it no longer matters if they're watching or not. That's when you've reached a level of detachment most people never touch. Most people go no contact and immediately start performing. They curate a new identity meant to provoke a reaction. They post with just enough edge to spark curiosity. They drop quotes, show up in new places, tag new people, everything carefully calculated to send a message. Look at what you lost. But here's the thing, when you have to tell someone what they lost, you haven't really moved on. You're still hoping they'll notice. You're still playing a role in their show. And that's not power, that's performance. If you truly want to crush their ego, you don't just disappear. You evolve, quietly, relentlessly. You create a life so aligned, so elevated, so authentic, that even if they do watch, they realize something gut-wrenching. They're no longer invited. Letting them watch from afar is not about revenge. It's about recognition. You're not building for them. You're not documenting your growth for their reaction. You're simply living deeply, fully, without needing to prove anything. And that silence, that peace, that effortless distance, that's what eats away at them. Not the flex, not the glow-up, the calm, the steadiness, the emotional absence that tells them everything they need to know. You've outgrown their access. And that growth didn't come from spite, it came from truth. From the moment you stopped checking your phone. From the moment you chose to be alone with your thoughts instead of distracted by the past. From the moment you looked in the mirror and decided, this isn't about them anymore. This is about me. That's what Stoicism looks like in motion. You don't erase the past, you just stop living in it. You don't delete the memories. You stop letting them define your decisions. And the version of you that rises from that? It's not reactive. It's not loud. It's not thirsty for validation. It's simply untouchable. And people feel that energy shift, even from miles away, even through screens, especially through silence. They notice you're not trying anymore. They notice the difference between someone healing to be seen and someone healing to be whole. You're not hiding. You're just inaccessible. You're not punishing. You're just uninterested. And that distance, that effortless detachment, that confident invisibility, it makes you unforgettable. Because now they don't know what's going on in your life. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know if you still care, if you've moved on, or if you've already replaced them. And the ambiguity, the mystery, that's what haunts them. Because ego hates uncertainty. Ego thrives on clarity, on knowing it still has a hold. But when you become unreadable, when your silence carries no message, no hidden plea, no emotional residue, they lose control. And without control, their identity starts to crack. Letting them watch from afar is not about baiting them. It's about freeing yourself. You're not posting for them. You're not performing for them. You're simply no longer disturbed by their presence. You've healed to the point where their view doesn't mean anything anymore. They can look. They can scroll. They can try to decipher, but what they'll find is a version of you they don't recognize. A version they don't have access to. A version who's no longer defined by their absence. That's what Stoic relationships are built on. Not the presence of a perfect partner, but the absence of dependency. You're not watching for their reaction. You're not seeking confirmation that they miss you. You already know what you bring to the table, and if they couldn't see it, that's their loss, not your flaw. So let them observe. Let them scroll through curated fragments of a life they used to know. Let them try to read your energy through the cracks. What they'll discover is that you've changed frequencies. You're not bitter. You're not broken. You're just not there anymore. And that emptiness, that void you left behind, that's what becomes louder than any word you could say. Because at first, they might think you're playing a game. They might think you're trying to manipulate. But as time passes and you remain steady, silent, focused, they realize this isn't a tactic. It's a new reality, one they no longer fit into. And that realization, that's what shatters the ego. The realization that your world didn't pause when they exited, that you didn't stall, collapse, or wait for them to return, that you moved forward, not out of rage, but out of evolution. You made peace with the pain. You mined wisdom from the silence. You transmuted the heartbreak into hunger, the loss into focus, the confusion into purpose. And now, you don't need to block them. You don't need to hide. You don't need to play any games, because you're no longer accessible to their tactics. You're no longer waiting for closure. You're no longer vulnerable to their re-entry. You've built a new identity, and they don't have the keys anymore. They can knock, but no one will answer. They can scroll, but they'll never know the whole story. And that distance, that invisible wall, it wasn't built out of spite. It was built out of necessity. Because once you understand your value, you stop offering it for free. Once you understand your peace, you stop negotiating it for moments of attention. Once you understand your path, you stop revisiting roads that only led to detours. That's how you rise, quietly, firmly, beyond the reach of anything that once made you beg for breadcrumbs. And you don't need to scream about it. You don't need to announce it. You just let them feel it, in the absence of your reaction, in the emptiness of your energy, in the silence of your self-respect. This is how Stoicism manifests, not in suppressing emotion, but in mastering it, not in avoiding connection, but in choosing alignment over attachment. And when they finally realize you've become someone they can no longer read, reach, or replace, what do you think that does to their ego? What do you think it feels like to look back and see that the person who once gave them everything no longer even flinches at their name? That's what it means to let them watch from afar. You're not in hiding, you're in command. And every step you take forward, every project you complete, every new level you reach, that's not revenge. That's rebirth, and they're not part of it. They chose distance. You just gave them what they asked for, fully, completely, irrevocably. And now, they're no longer the story. They're just a chapter, one you've finished reading, one you don't need to revisit. You're not angry, you're not aching, you're simply done. That's the full circle power of Stoic detachment. It's not dramatic, it's definitive. So let them watch, let them wonder, let them unravel in the silence. Because you're not reacting, you're rising. And if you've felt the shift, if you've started becoming this version of yourself who doesn't flinch, who doesn't chase, who no longer needs to be seen to feel secure, then show it. Like this video. Comment number 1 if you've felt that quiet power building inside you, and hit subscribe, because this journey isn't just about letting go. It's about becoming someone they can never reach again. Let's keep going. This was never just about silence. It was never about revenge. It was never about making them regret. From the beginning, this was about something far deeper, something most people never even realize they're chasing. It was about remembering who you were before the confusion, before the heartbreak, before the slow erosion of your standards at the altar of someone else's comfort. You see, heartbreak doesn't ruin us. It reveals us. It shows us where we were too soft, too open, too desperate to be chosen at the cost of our own peace. And when we finally see that, when we feel that truth settle in our chest with all its weight and wisdom, we have a choice. Stay there or rise, and if you've come this far, you already know what you chose. You chose the silence that doesn't just echo, but strengthens. You chose the transformation that doesn't beg to be seen, but speaks in how you move. You chose Stoicism, not because it makes you untouchable, but because it makes you whole. And whole people don't chase, they attract. They don't plead, they protect. They don't try to be chosen, they choose themselves again and again. So let them wander, let them scroll, let them sit in the distance they created, the distance you turned into a boundary. You don't owe them a text, you don't owe them a hint. You don't even owe them the story of how you rebuilt yourself. All they need to know is this: you didn't become cold, you became clear, you didn't shut down, you woke up. And now that you've remembered your value, your silence isn't empty, it's sacred. It's not absence, it's evolution. You never needed to prove anything. You just needed to stop proving yourself to people who only saw fragments of your worth. Now, you don't give them fragments. You give them nothing, not out of hate, but because you've given everything you had, and what came back wasn't enough. So now you reserve that everything for yourself. And the life you're building? It doesn't include ghosts. It doesn't include games. It doesn't include ego-driven connections that thrive on power plays and passive aggression. This is your era. Not of proving, but of presence, of discipline, of direction. The kind of life that doesn't scream for attention, but demands respect in silence. The kind of identity rooted so deeply in truth that no storm, no rejection, no loss can shake it. That is what it means to become untouchable. That is what it means to crush an ego, not by force, but by standing so solid in your own that theirs crumbles in comparison. So walk forward, not as someone who was broken, but as someone who was rebuilt. Someone who saw the fire, walked through it, and didn't just survive, but emerged forged, focused, and unbothered. You're not bitter. You're not stuck. You're not pretending. You're becoming, and that is what they'll feel long after. The silence has done its work. Stoicism isn't just a philosophy anymore, it's who you are now. Stoic relationships start within, and now you know. You don't need to be chosen, because you've already chosen yourself.